Welcome. Our guest tonight is Ian Guthrie, and we are going to hear 4 compositions by him. And I think right now I would like to just play the first, but I have to share screen share this piece, and then we'll identify it afterwards. It just seems like a very appropriate opening written by a 19-year-old Ian Guthrie at that point. I will tell you that much. So let's see. I have to share screen, share sound. Bingo. And here we go. Ian has been working on righteousness, by the way. That's why that picture looked that way, if you notice. I'm sorry. I clicked the wrong. Is that the, no, that is the opening. Yes. Let's try that again. It starts with piano. Sorry about that. You know what they say in New Jersey, ignorance is bliss. Okay. Tell us about that, Ian.
Well, first of all, I wanted to hide my face because I'm not going to say how old I am now if I haven't already announced it, but the age I am now doesn't always, sometimes likes to smirk at the 19-year-old me when it was doing. So that's the very first thing.
Yeah, when
19 was a very different time for me, and so the title people probably want to know the blunt reason. Well, the blunt reason for the title is I was dealing with, the teenage relational things at the time, and that was kind of the part of a suite where that piece represented, that's the final straw, that was their problem. And so you could tell that if you think I'm mature today, know that I wasn't always that way. If you don't think I'm mature, well, I would kind of agree, things haven't changed that much. But that's kind of where the title is. But what I really like about the piece is I think it really, the opportunity for an orchestra to do it, I don't know why they did it, because it was a weird thing to program, but the opportunity, I think, really encouraged me to keep pursuing composition. And it really encouraged me because it was one of the first pieces I wrote where I had been experimenting with polytonality, because I grew up, and as probably a lot of people did, with theory 1 through 3, you learn a lot of voice leading rules, and then you get into contemporary music, and there's no real strategy outside of 12-tone music. So I was kind of on my own to look for, how do I make polytonality sound good? And so this is what came from those sketches, and I was very interested in a more, at the same time, I was also getting really into world music and syncopation and the like, and I wanted to really train myself to be more fluent in some of these tools. And so this piece really represents that, and the fact that it had this early reception from this orchestra in Seattle, and then since then, what's his name? The guy who does Sounds New for Nakusa, since he's played it a few times. I just think the piece represents kind of the legacy. I'm willing to call it still one of my staple compositions that I haven't discarded, but it represents, I think, my turn away from having to write tonal music or rely on tonal paradigms and relying on a post-tonal tertian paradigm. And I've since gone in many directions from there, but I think the piece represents that, and represents kind of the vignettes of a lot of ideas that I had going on in undergrad. And now I think a lot of that has blossomed. Maybe not, but it certainly, I think, fulfills the interests that I had at the time, timbrally, ensemble-wise, tonally, and thematically. I think that represents what I like of the piece at this time in my life.
Well, what can you tell us about yourself? Let's do that. Let's do that for a couple of minutes. What kind of a bio that's not talking about 4 continents and 11 capital cities, or something else?
11 capital cities.
You
I don't know what that's referring to, but
explaining. Okay. So how did you get into music? When did that start?
Okay. I got into music. That's a tough one, because I don't have that great of memory before I was 9.5. I grew up with I've recovered from it a lot, but I grew up with epilepsy. I wasn't in the hospital all the time, but a lot of my early memories are visits to or from the hospital for routine tests, or for severe health issues, health crises. And so my parents tell me I saw the pianist when I was 6 at my church, and I told my parents I want to be like that. And somehow music, with all the other interests I had, has remained a big thing. I think it's one of those things where God puts something in some people to really follow this certain vocation. And I think he called me to this, and not everyone has that same kind of calling. But I think one thing that a lot of us in music can relate to is there isn't always an audible voice that we hear, but the way God plans and directs our steps helps us to kind of maybe fall into things before we realize how tough they are. I often joke with people, if I knew music was going to be this hard, I would have never chosen it. But I think God made me interested in it before I knew that would be the case. I currently teach at a Christian university called Calvary University, and where God continues to challenge me in a lot of ways. There's a lot of different opinions, different theologies, or theological opinions within something called dispensationalism, if you know what that is, that's represented here. But I think it's I think there's a chance, and I'm praying and hoping that we really, through our distinctives, create something stronger here. I certainly struggle a lot, and God convicts me a lot of the things I do. But I think God had. I got into music by seeing it at church. I continue to do music, I think, because God has given me so many opportunities to witness people, ironically, through music. I meet a lot of non-Christians, a lot of people that live very different lifestyles than I do. But I think the fact that as uh, as Bill and others have said in Facebook and other places, uh, a lot of us have a mentality that's very perfectionistic, or at least a striving towards excellence. And I think God has used that to allow me and a lot of us to represent that God is a God of excellence and a God of creativity, not just a God of legalism, not a God that is a killjoy, but I think God is a God who loves creativity and loves people and loves to try to reason, or at least to converse with people. And I think I have met people, been able to talk with people, been able to witness people in very unusual ways that I don't think anyone in most of the churches I've ever been in has ever seen. But kind of ironically, non-Christian artists have kind of allowed me into this place. And so I feel like right now, though, that mission field is trying to train the next generation to be musicians that maybe they won't be in classical music, maybe they'll be doing very different things, but all the same, I want to see more Christians in the musical sphere, because if there aren't Christians there, it's going to be filled by non-Christians. And part of our vocation, I think, is to not win the world or win the country for Jesus, but to be Christians and lights in an increasingly dark world. And so we need to be pursuing excellence in order for the world to take notice of what God's doing.
I just
That's
wondered,
longer than 2 minutes, and so I'm sorry about that, Bill, but I tried.
yeah, a likely story. Okay, I'm not one to talk much, so I try to use me as a good example. That's sarcasm. I want to point out that the first word in our organization, Christian, is, of course, is what Ian follows in the order of his life. Christ comes first, and Ian comes second. Right?
That's what it should be. Um,
It's just a coincidence.
yeah, well, I don't know if it's entirely coincidental. There's, I mean, I don't know. God works in mysterious ways, but it's certainly something to strive for, and it's certainly something to show that uh, there's something to be said about our name and whatever people use for better or for worse in it, uh, living up to that. Jesus certainly had an interesting name. It wasn't that unusual to have the name Jesus, nor was it unusual to have someone with the title of Christ. But Jesus says, okay, I'll go with that, and I will show you the full extent of what that means. And so maybe in an imperfect sense, we represent, knowingly or unknowingly, either who we were, we show who this is who we were, and God's given us a new name, or God has made something new out of this old, and that's what my name points to. So I think there's always something we can do with a name, even if we don't always intend it, or if our parents didn't always intend it. I mean, the name of the Lord is something to be praised. The name of the Lord is his reputation, and we are supposed to represent that reputation. And sometimes we have that directly in our names, sometimes we don't, but there's always an opportunity to be made with stuff like that. So that's my response.
What's the difference between a nocturne and a nightmare for you, Ian?
I think the pun is always fun. I did not intend to make that rhyme, but it happens all the time. I I like puns in my music. I like catchy titles. I like to. I like the. I'm still very much a romantic at heart in some ways. Sometimes a very wounded one, but I like the idea of a nocturne being more still, but perhaps sinister. A nightmare, I think, is a more grotesque version. And nightmares and nocturnes, while I'm still working on it, is sort of representing that. It was written, started writing it during the very, very beginning of the pandemic, before it even really became pandemic. But I've worked on it very carefully because I want to. It was when I was graduating, it was about time. I felt like I've proven that I can write in a boxed style, or write in a set of boxed styles for academia. Now I just want to write what I want. And I think it really represents my my dissatisfaction with just a tonal idiom, because it feels very tonal, but also a need for something more organized and more beautiful than just seemingly random sounds of nature. I'm very interested in all sorts of nature. I grew up in the countryside outside of Portland, Oregon, in the gorge. So I'm very interested in that, but I'm also very interested in, there's something clearly beautiful. And the more I do research in aesthetics and pedagogy, I find tonality isn't just some random system. You go to any culture and you find some sort of tonal centricity, and people are drawn to it. And so I think God didn't, that's not a mistake. I think that's something God wants us to see. And so trying to imperfectly merge all these things together in my own time. But the nightmare is certainly the more grotesque. And if you listen to those pieces, you'll hear more dissonant harmonies in the nightmare sections versus the more nocturne sections, where it's, relatively speaking, more tonally anchored.
Well, let's hear now and see Ian playing his composition, which he often does, of course. He is a really fine pianist. If you want to keep him in your prayers sometimes, he has some issues with his wrist, hands?
They're getting better, but they got dislocated. Both of them got dislocated in November. One of them got dislocated right before playing the Fauré Requiem. So I have been able to perform, but I've had to perform under some pain for a while. So
we'll at any rate, let's hear. First of all, share screen. Lost in a Gloomy Wood.
I forgot, Bill. I forgot that there were two movements in that recording. I only gave you the score for the first one. I wasn't thinking when they went to that second movement. I thought, "Uh-oh, this is going to be a while."
Well, I would like to hear some comments from our colleague composers, please.
Can I go? So, Ian, I really love this piece. And first, I just wanted to say, like, you made it look way too easy to play.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it was really good. And the piano you had didn't do it justice. I mean, it would have been, I could tell, like, super great on, like, a really, really long piano. So, I had just one question, because to me, it's really fascinating listening to your way of composing. Are you thinking more along the lines of like texture, so like horizontal and like vertical density and like register in terms of like the piece's development?
That piece, I wanted to think in terms of a melody. There was a melody in some parts. Da, 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 da. And so that kept going for about 4 phrases in a couple spots. But that was sort of the melodic idea. But my other goal behind it was how could I create a piano texture that was sort of like Gaspar de la Nua as far as being almost orchestral in scope, but then also having the rhythmic density of someone like Fernie Howe or Elliott Carter. And so there was both a textural and melodic element. I definitely wanted to keep the melodic element, but my goal was once I figured out approximately what I wanted to hear, which that's one thing that made it really hard to write. Is it was really hard for me to hear things that I didn't know if I could do and had never played at the piano. So trying to hear things, trying to write down what I'm hearing, seeing how it worked at the piano, and then trying to come up with material that it fits with it. And I actually made some revisions to the second movement because I felt like some ideas just never blossomed enough. So I had some slightly different additions in it when I performed it in Atlanta a few weeks later. But I was thinking both ways, and my goal was ultimately, how do I create something that has some sort of sense of time, but almost a mental breakdown of meter to where it felt like it was trying really hard to that there was no meter that was quite able to prevail, but doing it all in a way that could be notated for the piano without having too much aleatory. So I ended up having to do some aleatory in the first movement, but for the most part, all of that is rhythmically precisely notated with some instructions. So my goal was something textural, but also something that I just wanted to throw my hat into the mix, see if I could actually I wanted to write myself something harder because I'm so used to playing something like Islame or something by Liszt if I want something hard. And I thought, I really need to train myself to try to utilize pianistic tools rather than just throwing things on a page. And I don't think I did that good of a job of writing something pianistic. It's way easier for me to learn something by Liszt because it's so much easier to follow. But it was sort of an exercise in trying to write more concert etude kind of things as opposed to just writing something that I liked to hear. And so I really saw it as a tool in development as a composer for the piano as well as a pianist. So that was really the ultimate goal, neither texture nor melody, but both of those were byproducts of that. So that's a really long answer, but hopefully that explains all the directions that came into that piece. And thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
Ian, talk about now the crescent moon shines dim and on high.
Okay.
Piece we're going to hear because we want to move it along here a little bit.
Yeah, we might. Are we going to do we want to do that because we've got, or do we want to just do that instead of the song cycle because we've got only so much time.
No, let's hear them. But I mean,
Okay. The crescent moon shines dim on high. It was a line from a poem I was reading. My second year at Florida State, my doctorate. My teacher was very big on titles, and I like titles anyway, but I was just reading some poetry to try to find titles, and this one really stuck, especially with this piece, because I was originally just saying it was a piece for string quartet, but I really wrote it. The first half of it is really written under my gap year and the leadership of the late Ladislav Kubik, but he unexpectedly died, and I think it was actually, of all things, right before Halloween of 2017. Um, he really wanted to get this piece played, even though it was really difficult. And when he died, it was really hard to get people to record it. So I had to throw out a little dough to get it recorded. But I really wrote it in remembrance. It sounds sacrilegious, in remembrance of him, because he was he thought a lot like me in terms of composition, and was very devoted to his students. And it was just a reminder, though, how frail his life was because of his health conditions, and I guess how frail all life can be. And so I thought a crescent moon really represented well the frailty and the glimmer of hope that anybody can have, but also the reality that there's a lot of darkness and a lot of uncertainty around things. And so this piece is sort of in the same vein as the last piano piece. There's a lot of post-tonal elements and even some aleatoric elements, but the goal of it is to represent sort of the sadness and the hopefulness that is defeated in the, I guess, in physical life. Everyone's going to die, and it's that there's a tragedy there. So it was my response to some of that at the time.
let's hear that now. Sorry. Oh, okay. Stop playing with the screen, Boncher. Okay. Somebody who hasn't said something, say something.
I just wanted to say something about the piano piece earlier. And Ian, you are some fantastic pianist. Who was your piano teacher?
Who was it? I had a few. I don't know if you knew of John Owings at TCU.
No, I mean in Portland when you grew up.
Oh, you might have known Barbara Roberts.
Barbara.
Barbara Roberts.
Yeah.
And then when I got to college, it was Renato Fabro.
Yeah. No, Barbara. I was just curious because I live in Portland.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I love that. I mean, it was amazing. You used the whole range of the piano and all different colors on the piano. So it was amazing.
Well, it's a story I can go through later, but Ron didn't want to, but he taught me Scarbo, but he also taught me what is it? Fantasia and Ostinato by Corleano. So I got to learn a lot of unorthodox stuff through both those pieces. So Ron kind of, whether he wanted to or not, kind of turned me into a beast at the piano a little bit of a maniac there. So
Okay.
Speaking of Portland, and Jan, I asked your husband a question later. Is the answer yes or no?
What?
I asked your husband a question on the phone earlier.
Yeah.
Did he? Can you do that?
I don't think I'm capable.
Oh, that sounds you'd be perfect for it then in that case.
I mean, I don't know how to work the computer that well.
Oh, you don't have to work it at all. I can.
Well, I'll talk to you about it later.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. So, tentatively, hopefully, we might have Jen be our composer this coming month in
But
March.
wait, you didn't tell me that. He just said.
Oh, well, that's what I asked him to do. Okay, so I'm sorry to put you on the spot. It's so embarrassing. Please say yes. Yes. Okay.
I'm gonna actually, funny thing, I'm gonna be in Portland next month too for a few days.
Are you?
Yeah, Funeral Music is doing a concert with a piece of mine. So
What concert are you going to?
March 20th, there's a concert, I think in Lincoln Hall. But yeah, maybe I'll be maybe like the 19th or whatever we have that. I'll actually be in I'll be just a few miles from you, Jan, when that happens, if that ends up being the thing.
Great.
Hope you visit each other.
We should,
If
that works
not,
out.
what am I going to say? Well, we'll find out. Any other? What time is it? It's 8:08. How about if we hear now where dreams come true? And Ian is explained to me a little earlier that this does not come from Disney World. Sorry, Jerry, I know that's your home state and you're very proud of it, but it comes from someone else with an unusual first name.
Am I supposed to answer that?
I guess so. I'm trying to make novel.
There's the Prince Caspian, then the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. There was that scene where they looked for the long lost relatives of Prince Caspian, and one of them says something to the effect of "Don't come here. This is the place where your dreams will come true." And then one of the kids, the children say, "That sounds wonderful," and he clarifies, "That's not what I mean. Not daydreams, but dreams." And so even though this cycle is called Where Dreams Come True, and the phrase "This is where dreams come true" appears in 3 of the 4 songs, that isn't from the poetry. The rest of the poetry is by Sarah Teasdale, but I couldn't find anything by Sarah Teasdale that got into this this play on words with dreams. So I don't think I quoted verbatim from Narnia, but I got kind of close, and so I guess I do what any good composer does. I stole it.
It's a lot better than "Dunkel ist das Leben ist der Tod." That like that. That's good. Let's hear "When Dreams Come True." We're going to hear it. We're going to see it. Yeah, I don't think. Oh, yeah. Well, excuse me. You're going to. Yes, we're going to see the score with this, of course. And I discombobulated this. Wait a minute. Share screen. Share. Flutter pedal.
These are very powerful settings, Ian.
Thank you.
Amen.
You got an outstanding tour there, and good use of that, and very, very, very effective. It's a gorgeous cycle.
Thanks. There's something about the art song. I don't like the art song is very personal to me, and I think every song cycle I've written is for a specific person, and sometimes they've gotten repeats with other performers. But there's this cycle I think was really mature in the sense that I felt like the singer really embodied what I was after very well, and not the most radical harmonic piece I ever wrote. Even at the time in 2019, I felt like this is kind of conservative, but I really like I was really happy with the end result of it, other than I wish we got to do it more than once.
Why do you want to not be conservative musically? I'm talking about now, please.
Your biggest problem would be to find, additional coloraturists that have got it, that can really do that.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. I think now I'm much more interested in being conservative. I've written a lot of recent things for bands and the like, but during academia, I think there was a big push, especially with some of the awards that they give to young composers, trying to develop a really coherent language that didn't sound too poppy and the like, but also trying to be relevant. So trying to straddle those two boundaries. And so I think looking back at the piece, I'm really happy what I did and want to do more of it. But at the time, there was certainly a thought this piece certainly doesn't fit with some of the more progressive, so to speak, kind of things I am writing. So I think the piece served a really great function. And I think part of me never wanted to believe I had to be a total composer. I wanted to believe I could be whatever I wanted. But I also think the whatever gifts God has given me, he certainly hasn't given me a gift to ignore tonality. He hasn't given me a gift to not think in that realm. And I think this piece was very authentic of me. So I always was happy with how it turned out, but it certainly was some of my other output of the time definitely was more radical than that.
Were you playing the piano?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a lot of other pianists that can play your music, or do you usually play it?
I've tried, but there have been a couple pieces people have played, but I've found if I say I'm going to be the performer, I can get a lot of performances. There aren't many people that want to do it. And I just don't usually have a reason to write a piano piece for someone else. No pianist has really asked me for a piece. So I found I just write for myself, and it's usually the easier way to go. I'm trying to write more conservative pieces, and my piece Farewell Elegy is certainly more in that vein, but I just haven't had the time or the interest. Usually I'm more interested in writing something for a large ensemble or writing for a chamber ensemble or something. And I think part of the problem is I have such big hands that I conceive of things orchestrally that piano is one of the few instruments where I haven't yet taken the challenge of writing as simple as possible. I've done that with band, I've done that with orchestra to a sense, haven't really done it with the piano. But there's also something in art songs that I must say that very, very influential on me is Wolf's Prometheus, and as well as some other songs by Wolf. And there's something about Wolf's Lieder that they would never be the same if they were easier to accompany. There's something about the intense emotion that Wolf is able to bring out of the voice of the piano as two equals that I'm really after in my songs. And so while this piece is certainly really, really hard to perform on the piano as well as for the voice. I think there's something theatrical and there's a dialogue and a theater that comes out of it that could not come out of it if I wasn't willing to take some of these risks and do some of these more out there things.
Robert, it's nice to have you with us. You have anything to say? I know you couldn't get here sooner.
Well, I just caught the tail end of your piece. I'm sorry I missed most of it, Ian, but and I enjoyed your discussion of why you write or why you're interested in somewhat tonal music. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. I would say you have a voice, and if you have something to say, then that's what you should say.
The older I get, the more I think you're right on those things. I think I grew up a kid, and I used to think like a child, and I'm starting to leave those childish things behind. Part of me wishes I did it sooner, but no, I appreciate.
I know even my professor, he had similar experience to you in academia and being constantly pushed to write atonally, and it just wasn't where he was, but he learned to do that, and I learned a lot about that from him, and that added a lot to my voice and my palette that I have to use. But music, to me anyway, just the way my philosophy is, music is meant to be listened to, and if you have to analyze it to understand it, then it's not really very good music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, doing what there are all kinds of, it's all the same. We tend to so much, it's like being in middle school. You try to act like all the other kids do, and whichever lunch table you're sitting at. So if you're at the atonal lunch table, then you want to be atonal. If you're in the tonal lunch table, you want to be tonal. If you're in the bluegrass table, whatever. And it's also good to not copy other people. You tell kids that when they're 12 years old. If all the other kids jump off the bridge, would you jump off the bridge? You know, that applies to everything. We need to be getting a direction from what we're really supposed to do, not just imitate. And then other people congratulate how good we're doing because we're using the exact we're wearing the same clothes like the kids in middle school do. You know, the style now is to wear it this way, so we want to dress that way too. There's there's a problem in that.
Mm-hmm.
But that piece is very effective piece, Ian. That's it's very, including this is a place where dreams come from, like look out. Well, it is now more than an hour and a half, and we have been very glad to have you guys with us. Some of you have gone on, some of you have joined us. In Jesus' name, keep up the good work, and Soli Deo Gloria.
Amen.
Amen. God bless you all, and have a good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.